one and all, to Voyages of Shelf Discovery. It's kind of hard to remember to say that right. I'm Earl at thelogbook.com, and I have not been on camera to do this before. Puck here probably has, but I haven't. Puck the cat, ladies and gentlemen. It's Puck the cat. Doesn't matter if I'm doing this or if I'm doing Phosphor.Fossils, Puck will show up and put in his guest appearance. So, I wanted to talk to you about relaunching Voyages of Shelf Discovery. There are some changes in store. The first batch of these that I did largely in 2018 and 2019, the format was that it was going to be all footage, there was going to be text commentary on screen, and I would not be speaking and I would not be seen. I'm a voice guy. I'm a voice-over guy. I'm a behind-the-scenes production kind of guy. I'm not really an on-camera kind of guy. Now, Puck here, Puck is very photogenic. He is happy to be on camera. So, good for him. Me, I don't really necessarily have to be on camera quite as much. But I discovered that doing this show, or any kind of show that way, was actually much more labor-intensive than just sitting here on camera and talking to you instead of, putting a bunch of text on screen all the time. So, we're going to try doing it this way for a bit to see what happens. I'll watch the numbers, I'll watch the comments. If it goes nowhere after I do a batch of about 8 or 10 of these, I tried. I don't want it to detract from Phosphor.Fossils, for example, and this is going to be a one-time-a-week thing. Something drastic would have to change for it to happen more frequently than that. And if something changed and I suddenly had gobs more free time, that would probably be an instance where, I've lost a job or something. That would not be a time to sit around talking about action figures. So, we're going to try it. I'm going to record these in batches, and we will, we'll see what happens. Maybe nothing happens. But let's start with a story about this wonderful room that I'm sitting in that, there are always so many questions about. It is not a virtual background. This is a real place. If I wanted to go back there and pull something off the rack and bring it up, I could. It's kind of funny because I never expected I would have a display like this set up. I've always been an open your figures and play with them kind of guy. Now what changed that was the theft of my original collection of Kenner ships and playsets. Also quite a few Playmates Star Trek ships. I had a large collection of those, those big lovely ones that had stands that were great display pieces. It didn't cost a huge amount of money. They were nice, they were big. And when I moved back to Arkansas from Green Bay, I was keenly aware that I was moving back chiefly to, really what I was coming back for were two things that brought me back to Arkansas. My dad had had a stroke, and I was unsure if I could count on the woman he was married to stick that out and take care of him. And so I thought I had better be, maybe 40 minutes away instead of 16 hours away. The other thing was that I was getting married, which at the time I was very enthusiastic about that. Now I kind of want to go back in time and warn myself this is not going to work the way you think it is. But I was kind of enchanted with that idea, and so back I came. All of my stuff went into these big Rubbermaid roughneck containers and into a self-storage unit because the apartment we were able to get in Fort Smith, Arkansas, was not this sprawling two-story loft apartment that I had had in Green Bay, where I literally turned part of the bedroom into, kind of my action figure museum. That's indicative of a bedroom where absolutely no action is happening other than the action figures. But but I loved it. I worked on the lighting, I worked on the organization of the displays and everything. It was something I'd always wanted to do. I finally had room to do it. But I knew I was going to have to put that back on hold coming back to Arkansas. The weekend before my wedding, I went to pay the rent on the self-storage unit, one of whose selling points was, we have cameras all over, nobody can get away with anything, 24-hour surveillance, it's all on tape, your stuff is secure. I went to my unit and found that there was a padlock on there that was not the padlock I had put on there. I brought this to the management's attention, and they said, well, if you are, if anyone's going to take a bolt cutter to that padlock, it's going to have to be you. We're not going to do it. I was like, fine, get me a bolt cutter. So I cut the padlock off that had nothing to do with the padlock I had put on there, which was a combination lock. This was just a key padlock. I think if you were going to pull something like that, you would do it in such a way that maybe wouldn't be noticed. And it turned out my unit had been burglarized, to put it mildly. An old stereo amplifier that I had brought back from Green Bay had been taken. We'll get back to that in a moment, because they were more than welcome to it. All of the Rubbermaid roughnecks that contained what was left of my Star Wars vehicles, play sets, no figures. The figures I insisted on keeping in the apartment. The ships, they were big and bulky, and, I understood those needed to go into storage. They got stolen. That was in the summer of 2000. In 2006, my buddy Dave got in touch with me. Dave was kind of my right-hand guy at thelogbook.com at the time. And he was a few years into being a father. His former college roommate had contacted him saying, hey, I've got this stash of my old Star Wars toys. Do you want it? Dave had a toddler at the time. No, he did not want it, to put it succinctly. But he did remember the story of what had happened with my collection. And so he put Andrew, whose name you see in the end credits of this show and everything that I do for the logbook, under the sort of nebulous heading of set dressing donors. Andrew is kind of the king of the set dressing donors, and whether he realizes it or not, Andrew is the guy who kind of got all of this started. Andrew had 3 big boxes of Star Wars things, and he said, okay, some of it's old, some of it's not necessarily in good shape. It's yours if you want it. I was all in. I was all in. When his items arrived at my place and I'm thinking this is the summer of 2006, I was stunned to find that even though he had taken his toys out and played with them, he had kept them largely. He had put them back in the original boxes when he was done with them. So back here you have a Millennium Falcon in the box. It doesn't necessarily have all of the pieces, and it's been played with. It's, it's a little dirty. It's seen some action. The same with the Death Star, the same with the X-Wing, the same with the Twin Pod Cloud Car, the same with the Snowspeeder, and the same with the Tauntaun. And the Tauntaun has gotten has made a lot of appearances. But first off, I was just intensely grateful to have any of it replaced, especially for the low, low price of it's yours if you want it. That is a once in a lifetime score there. But not long after Andrew's stash of goodies arrived, Hasbro started doing this little thing called the Vintage Collection, where they brought back the original Kenner branding and packaging, but were doing new figures in it. So it's new figures in the old style of packaging. But if you're looking at this behind me, then it may not necessarily be apparent to you that these are newer things in older packaging. So, not as valuable as original 12-back Kenner figures or anything like that. But the appearance of the Vintage Collection started making me think, there might be a display somewhere in this, somewhere down the road when I can afford it. About this time, I was also converting the toy box section of the logbook.com, my website, to WordPress, and the WordPress theme that I had picked out allowed for picture headers. And so I embarked on something that I now refer to as the infamous clothes hanger shower curtain rod photo shoot for Toy Box, where I took figures that I had in the packages at the time. And some of those figures have since been opened. But I found the original pictures, and I was trying to shoot them close enough so that it looked like they were on a rack, but you couldn't really tell that what they were hanging on were plastic clothes hangers hanging on the shower curtain rod in my bathroom in Alma, Arkansas. And that was kind of the genesis of, what if I set things up like a store display? And for a long time, I was looking for something like what they call a retail spinner rack, which is, a metal rack. It rotates. You'd find figures. The very first Star Wars action figures I bought were on a retail spinner rack, and that's kind of why I wanted one of those. And where I lived in Arkansas at the time was undergoing the absolute opposite of a renaissance economically. There were places going out of business all the time, and so I was starting to keep an eye open for precisely that sort of thing. The answer turned out to be cheaper and closer to me than I realized. My friend Elizabeth had run a yarn and fiber store in Fort Smith, and she was closing it down because the business was not what it was at the time she opened it. The difference between the time she opened it and the time she closed it, of course, was the 2008-2009 meltdown of the American economy. And people suddenly had, nothing to spend. So what I procured from her were 3 panels of, I think they're 2-foot by 6-foot metal slat grid walls is what they're called. There's a difference between slat grid and grid wall, and this is stuff that I've learned because I have accumulated more grid wall. I now have 13 panels in total, and the leap from 3 free ones to 13, which, I picked up 10 panels in there somewhere, and I actually picked them up very cheap, because living in Utah, you are in an environment where, and I'm going to say this as non-judgmentally as I can. I'm going to try to keep this just very factually based without inserting, my very strong opinions on the matter into the conversation. In Utah, women are encouraged to work out of the home instead of going to a workplace. Well, I say in Utah, women are encouraged to do that. In Utah, women of a certain religious group are encouraged to work out of the home. And so you would have Scentsy stores and Oh, what was the thing that was all the craze in 2018 or so? 2018, 2019, oh, LuLaRoe? Was that it? The women's fashion line that turned out to be this super sketchy multi-level marketing. Of course, that Scentsy, everything, it's all multi-level marketing. That stuff thrives in Utah because of that ecosystem that says, no, you work from home and you keep the kids at home, and you somehow work and homeschool the kids and have dinner ready for me by 5, which, okay, trying real hard not to get opinionated there. Leaving it alone. Needless to say, I picked up a lot of grid wall pretty cheap in Utah because people were getting out of these MLM things and suddenly found that they had filled their homes with retail fixtures. So, grid wall, hooks, they're really easy to find in Utah, I'll put it that way. So, that brings me to, a few crazy notions, some of which may be in your head, some of which have circulated over time. How much money has been sunk into this display behind me? Maybe more than I think, but generally speaking, a lot less than you think. That's kind of a weird answer, so let me explain. I have a lot of reaction figures. Remember, reaction figures used to be a thing you could find everywhere. Toys R Us, Hastings especially had a lot of them. Well, and I used to go to Hastings a lot. And if you remember, Hastings went under sometime, I believe, in 2016. A lot of reaction and Biff Bang Pow figures. Biff Bang Pow did the Flash Gordon 3 3/4 inch, the Twilight Zone 3 3/4 inch. A lot of that stuff was going for fire sale prices. So the Star Trek Original Series reaction figures that I have in the background over here, I generally picked those up for about $2 or $3 a piece. Reaction is still a thing. I picked up a few of them right around Christmas because they had a special deal going. Without that special deal, generally Reaction Super 7 wants $16 to $18 per figure for their new stuff. I was able to get some of the original wave of reaction figures a lot cheaper. And even earlier than that, when KB Toys went under, I picked up quite a few Star Wars Episode 2 and Episode 1 figures. A few of which are still on the wall behind me, but quite a few of them got sold off because I ran convention vendor tables in Arkansas at events like Consplosion and GlitchCon, and sold lots of those figures, lots of Doctor Who figures that I had wound up with extras of in various lots. When Toys R Us went under, I was able to pick up almost a complete extra collection of the Batman 66 Funko 3 3/4 inch figures to keep on the cart. I already had some that I had opened. These, I was just keeping them on the cart because who doesn't love Batman 66? And like I said, there was some stuff that I'd had for years and years that I had taken to conventions to sell, and they wound up in boxes. That stuff all moved to Utah with me. And Utah was where I was really able to start setting up the whole grid wall thing. And, it was kind of like, okay, the convention ecosystem in Utah is not, I'm going to say it's not as vibrant as the one in Arkansas. There are only a couple of them a year. One of them is FanX, formerly Salt Lake City Comic Con, and the prices to get a vendor table at that are huge. And from the moment we arrived in Utah, we were struggling, so I gave up on selling any of the convention wares that I had left over and just hung them on the racks, hung them on the hooks. There's another category of stuff that winds up on display, which is, basically other people's cast-offs, which I suppose that's kind of how this all started, with Andrew sending me stuff that he didn't want to have to haul around and take care of anymore. But it's like I've got a couple of Daypole Doctor Who figures still on the card that I inherited from someone. I have 4 intact Star Trek Happy Meal boxes. The food's not still in them, don't worry. Those were given to me as part of a stash of other stuff. An almost complete collection of the old FASA Doctor Who gaming miniatures, the little white metal 25, 35 millimeter gaming figures that they used to have in the 80s, They still have them now, but they're more of a specialty item. Back then, it was, it was something you'd find at general retail. Some boxed Atari games that were given to me by friends over the years. Usually, those were very common ones like Asteroids or Pac-Man or Defender or what have you. Some of them are still shrink-wrapped and have never, nothing in there has ever come out again. But there's another selection of Atari 2600 boxes, which is kind of funny because there's actually nothing in them but styrofoam to help them keep their shape. I picked those up in a lot that I think they were about to be disposed of, and, they had been knocked flat. So, yeah, I'll take those, put some styrofoam in them that had come from, packing from other things. And, yeah, now they have their shape, and I've kind of got this display out of it, although what's in there is styrofoam and air and not old video games. So there's, and I will admit there are a few boxes back there that are empty, that do not have in them what it says is in them. There's a Doctor Who TARDIS playset, the junkyard TARDIS from the Doctor's wife. That's a case. I got that playset and I still have the pieces. They just don't live in the box. They are in a container with the Doctor Who figures that, moved back with me. So that brings us to the real question surrounding this whole display. Why? Why would anyone do this? Of course the answer is nostalgia, but let me sort of explain the psychology of that nostalgia. Going into a store like Service Merchandise or Kmart or any of these places that I used to go as a kid with my parents, when they were there to pick up something else, I would always make a beeline for the toy section, especially after Star Wars became a thing, and especially after '78, when those first Star Wars figures started appearing at retail. There was always a real air of possibility. You might get a new best friend. You might get nothing except the privilege of ogling all this stuff that you didn't have. That was still cool, too. The ultimate window shopping. I will admit that this is a very consumerist vision of nostalgia, but it inspires me. It gives me that happy little thrill of walking into a place that has everything. But also, in a professional sense, I do graphic design and branding, huge parts of my day job. What I have sitting behind me is a museum of branding that either did or didn't work. And there are ideas and there are warnings for the future, all encompassed in these things behind me. But really, ultimately, the simple thing is, it's my happy place. I never get tired of being surrounded by this display. I mean, and there are just weird sections of it. I mean, like, a sort of a chronology of Electric Light Orchestra vinyl from the first album to the most recent one. Some of those LPs have been traveling with me since my teens. A nearly complete collection of Odyssey 2 games that I've had since I was a kid, because I love the Odyssey 2 video game system. It was kind of one of those also ran systems alongside the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision. A collection of vintage space shuttle toys, and really just vintage space toys overall. Vintage kind of being within my lifetime, But the space shuttle stuff especially, that really harkens from the 70s, before the space shuttle had ever actually flown. And yet, every available piece of media, or, let's call it what it was, propaganda, was telling us, this is the next big thing. This is going to change everything. Get yourself some space shuttle before the space shuttle is even space shuttling. And, I fell for it lock, stock, and barrel because I was already a huge fan of real space exploration, thanks to a little book called the Star Wars Question and Answer Book about space, which I actually did a whole episode of Sci-Fi 5 podcast about, talking about that book. So, there's racks of little metal space shuttles I can fly around the room. Yes, I'm in. And, I love having those things around because, that, again, reminds me of my youth, more or less. I don't add to it too terribly often. What I'm about is creatively displaying what I already have. So, the question, how much money is in there? Probably more than I think, probably less than you think. I probably haven't spent as much money as you might think I have for this sort of thing going on behind me. But it just makes me happy to have it back there. And I'm not done with it yet either. I would like to find a couple of these big wall-width CD, DVD shelves like I used to have at my house in Alma. I had gotten rid of my CD collection and my DVD collection. Those had been sold off as we got into various tight spots, trying to pay the mortgage, trying to pay the bills. And so, I had these gigantic pieces of heavy furniture that were meant to hold things that were no longer there. Turns out those are great for action figures. They are fantastic for action figures. I would love to get some more of those. They've gotten to be very expensive pieces of furniture, though. The vast majority of my collection is actually loose figures, not stuff that's still in the packaging. And I like to have fun mixing and matching and creatively displaying those things. So you have stuff like, Gene Simmons from Kiss playing with the Cantina Band. Why not? It's funny, it's kind of a conversation starter, and it's indicative of both my sense of nostalgia and my sense of humor. Ultimately, this is what I have forsaken collecting other things to focus on. I used to have a gigantic CD collection, a gigantic DVD collection, like I said. Those things got flipped. Now I have a media server and not a DVD shelf. I used to be a serious collector of vintage video games. Not so much now. I mean, I have kind of a token nod to that life with a lot of boxes that are full of styrofoam. So this is what I've chosen to focus on collecting, and collecting responsibly. I'm not going broke doing this. I'm not taking a dime out of what's intended for the rent or the bills or for anyone else's rent or bills to do this. If I see something and it's like, oh, I really like that one character and I'd like to have that, and I have, just that little bit of money free to get it, okay, I'll do it. The rest of the time, this is fine as it is. It's not really begging to be added to. So anyway, that's the story of the room. What about the show? What about Voyages of Shelf Discovery? Going forward, I'm going to open a few items. Sure, why not? That seems to be all the rage on YouTube. I'll probably tell a few more stories like I've been telling you tonight, except hopefully a bit more compact and focused. And occasionally I'll be, giving you some commentary on collecting and new releases, things that interest and excite me. I'm not going to spend any time hating on stuff. I'm not going to pick some upcoming toy line and say, oh, I hate this, because life's too short for that. I'm here to talk about stuff that I love and stuff that I enjoy. I'm not one to, pour scorn and buckets of it on someone else's effort just because it's not something that meets my taste. It probably meets someone else's, or it wouldn't have made it to mass market. So, something to consider there. Something else the show probably won't be as slick. It's just me here, sitting in front of the camera, in the room. The room is a lot slicker than I am, and you'd probably be happier if I just leaned way over like this and let you look at the room. See, that was nice. I'll try to remember to do that more often. So, thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming back. Let's see what happens with this. Like I said, I'm going to try to do 8 or 10 of them. Look at the numbers, look at the comments, see if it's worth continuing to do. If not, I'm still here in my happy place. Thank you for watching.